Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore a relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, AC Stauble
and Isaac Hill.
Okay, so today on the Plant Cunning Podcast, we have Ike Baker on the show, and Ike is a podcaster as well from the Arcanum podcast, an author, an herbalist, and alchemist, esotericist, all sorts of stuff. So, Ike, how are you today?
I am excellent. I am so happy to be here among your distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to finally meet both of you, and I really appreciate you being here, given the fact that you're under the weather. So, thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and you've just come out of the Helene hurricane. You were pretty close in Western North Carolina, and you're back with electricity. How was that whole experience for you?
I think I like the word that you used. It was incomprehensible. Nicole and I, we both got lucky, that our area over here in Gastonia, we were hit, but not like Asheville. And for anybody that has listened to my podcast and kind of followed the journey over the last couple of years, they know that, Asheville is very much a part of my life and my base of operations. I run, I'm the imperator of the Asheville Temple of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm the historian at Mount Hermon, Lodge number 118 in Asheville downtown. So there's a lot going on there. I've got a lot of friends. We have a lot of friends in common, I think, that are suffering right now. And my heart goes out to them. And, the situation really for us was comparatively minor flooding and loss of power and internet and stuff like that for about 5.5 days. It's good to get you kind of, it's a good reset, but to be without electronics for a little while, but not in the way Asheville was, parts of Asheville. And what we're not talking about that I feel like I should bring a little light to, but I'm not seeing much of it outside of the local community, is that Asheville is part of a complex of cities. Yeah. It's maybe the biggest or most notable place in a region which is essentially unified in culture and everything. It's not like you've got New York and New Jersey, up there kind of close to each other. They consider themselves very distinct. Whereas, right. Even on Long Island, right? It's like Queens and Brooklyn are geographically on Long Island, but nobody will ever tell you that. And in Western North Carolina, it's one big family, and all those little cities like Spruce Pine and Black Mountain, Hendersonville, Old Fort. Old Fort is destroyed. I spent so much time there, and Marion, all those towns, they still need help. We're doing what we can. Given that the interstate collapsed and stuff, we'll be going on Sunday to help with clean water distribution and things of that nature. And right now there's a cold front coming in. So like people need to shift gears, right? And start sending blankets and hand warmers and things like that. So, but yeah, it's crazy. There's, like you said, it's incomprehensible, but thankfully I'm very grateful that where I live wasn't hit as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I feel like such a terrible thing to say.
Yeah, but it gives you the opportunity to go on Sunday and pass out, water and supplies and to offer your support, because you're still a part of the community. And so we need everybody, even people who haven't been hit as hard, like it gives you the opportunity to help. So
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so we have a traditional first question for the Plant Cunning Podcast, and it's, how did you come to the plant path? I know you're interested in all sorts of things, but how did you come to the plant path?
The plant path was here well before all the magic sort of happened. If I'm being honest, I have to say that I probably started with, I guess, like health food and nutritional sort of supplementation and stuff like that. Like where I grew up on Long Island in New York, a little town called Babylon, and they had a little health food store back there when like those things were not around. Like very popular, like maybe in the northeastern seaside or oceanside towns, but this little health food store named Sherry's. And I used to go in there, even back then I remember going in there and be like, man, I'm gonna spend an arm and a leg walking out of here. But it introduced me to herbal supplements,
Mm.
and things like
Yeah.
that. And I started taking like Cascara Sagrada for detox and all sorts of interesting stuff like that. Burdock root and all that stuff. I mean, we're talking like, I don't know, 1999, 2000. So I started out really kind of seeing how these things interacted with my body. I've always been somebody who's very somatically in touch. A lot of people don't know this about me because I don't talk about it very much, but I'm also, I'm a massage therapist. So I have a license in it, and I still practice in North Carolina. But that, the somaticism, the connection of body, mind, and then the incorporation of these natural things and intaking, right, alchemically their body, their mind, their salt, sulfur, and mercury, and things of that nature. That interaction I've been very sensitive to. So that's really how I started. Was at a young age. I was, I played sports in high school and college and things like that. And seeing how these things kind of help recovery, help sleep, I got really into the bioscience, the biochem and all that stuff, which I think is really good to know. I think you kind of have to know that if you're going to be a serious herbalist. Later on, I went to college for Chinese medicine. I did my massage therapy thing at New York College of Health Professions. I got a really, really strong grounding. Their program there is very, very, was started by Robert and Tina Sohn. They created this therapy called AMA. It was very popular in the 80s and then the 90s, and it kind of shifted gears. But it's a mostly, a lot of the staff is Chinese, and it's very centered in that very authentic root practice. And I remember going into my first herbal class, like materia medica, and I'm like so excited because I like the herbal stuff even more than I like the acupuncture. And I get there and we sit down, I got my book, and the teacher waits until everybody is seated and we're all paying attention. And he pauses and he walks over to the board and he just writes herb equals poison.
Whoa.
So it was like a really, really stark sort of admonishment to, the seriousness. Because it's very fun, it's very exciting. But particularly in Chinese medicine, when you're doing super powerful things with 3, 4, 5 hour decoctions,
Yeah.
they with multiple sort of things. And the materia medica they use includes animal parts, bone, sometimes other minerals.
Yeah.
So he wanted to really impress upon us herbs, and it goes back to that classical axiom. Well, the difference between medicine and poison is the dose. So it evolved over time into that. And then I took Western herbalism as well. My first Western herbal class was at the Open Center in New York City, and Robin Rose Bennett taught it.
Oh,
Nice.
yeah.
So, who I know that you've had on the
Yeah,
show.
she's great.
And
Love her.
yeah, she was fantastic. It was an amazing first course to have, and I still have the notebook from the classes that were
Oh.
jotting all her formulas down and things like that. But when I got involved with magic and the Western esoteric traditions, I started getting into alchemy. Started out as the spiritual alchemy, and then I started talking with serious alchemists: Phoenix Aurelius, Daniel Wiseman, Robert Allen Bartlett, and Mark Stavish. Started talking with these people, and Sky Mathis too, he's I don't know if he's as well known as the for his alchemical knowledge and his alchemical interest or practice, but he was a big influence on me in investigating the actual operative path of alchemy.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's where I'm at now. I'm just loading up, buying more, and it's just getting more and more expensive to sort of update and go further with the alchemical practice, and that's really it. I mean, we still do all sorts of gardening here and supplemental sort of stuff. But yeah, Nicole and I, my fiance, we're big gardeners, and we've been working for the last 2 years on a system of astrological gardening
Oh,
specifically
really?
as it applies to alchemy. And Phoenix helped quite a bit in we use his astronomical calendar in
Hmm.
order to kind of have a true Western sidereal perspective on what we're doing with the gardening and when to do which operations and sort of stuff like that. But Nicole's lapped me like she 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 came over to my house on Long Island where we met, and I had a little garden, and it was a very early stage in our relationship. I was like, I want you to plant the first plant in my garden this season. She kind of timidly did it, patted it down. And now she's lapped me like 10 times. She's such an incredible gardener and
Cool.
and such an incredible resource when I have no clue what I'm doing or I'm just shouting because I can't get this thing to flourish.
Yeah.
She's got the green, natural green thumb.
She loves it. Definitely feels a connection to plants and to the earth, and I do as well. We can spend a lot of time up here, with the textbooks and with the correspondences and with all the projects, but it's once you get your hands in the dirt, it's a totally, I mean, I guess cliche, but it's extremely grounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I don't think you can overstate how important it is for people, especially people who you can get so abstract, so lost in esoteric abstractions, but without having the grounding, it really you just get lost, and it's not real. It doesn't make it. Yeah, you need the reality of it.
Were there any particular plants in your garden this year that really outshone or that you were excited about?
Well, I like the word you used there
Yeah.
because I have been trying to grow rosemary successfully and really
Okay.
get this thing to establish
Yeah.
Yeah,
a really long time. It's a solar herb. I
Mhm.
really enjoy the aroma. I really enjoy the seasoning. I really enjoy it even as a tea.
Yeah.
But I've never been able to get this thing to grow more than maybe like, I don't know, 7 inches, eight
Yeah.
inches. So this year I actually the thing is I was growing it in garden beds where we've raised beds where we've prepared the soil.
Hmm.
And I should have known this because it's one of the first things that you know about a plant like rosemary is that it's traditionally really a Mediterranean plant, you know?
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and so it's like put it in the ground and leave it alone. And the less you water it, so we finally got this thing to establish, and it's maybe a little bit over a foot now. And I'm super happy because I have just felt so, we also help out at the community garden over here, and they have these massive rosemary bushes that have just established. They're huge. And I was like, I didn't even know rosemary got that big.
It
So
doesn't in New York and Long Island, so but
right, too
down in
too low,
Nashville area.
too loamy on Long Island, which loam is like the preferred soil, but not for those plants. We have just enough of a. It's not like super hard, firm clay, but it's still that red earth.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's almost more like desert type of soil, and so it's finally establishing. You know, I'm ethnically Greek and Italian, but my father is from Greece, so I grew up with a lot of those traditional sort of foods, preparations, medicines as
Mhm.
yeah,
well. So chamomile is a big one. Greek oregano we're growing, dill, stuff like that. A lot of herbs in the medicine garden, but we do vegetables here as well. But a
Nice.
little bit of a rougher year for that. We had some temperature fluctuations that were not really they weren't really serving us this year, but breaks my heart. But I talked to Byron Ballard, and she actually said she had a similar problem with
Yeah.
between the rainfall and the weather here this year in this region. She actually was a little disappointed, but she's a very sweet woman, so I wonder if she was just telling me that to make me feel better.
Yeah, they can't all be like ideal, perfect growing years, I guess, you know?
yeah,
Those are the years you learn a lot,
Yeah.
because a lot of this is about right allowing you're not we can feel like I am the gardener, really you're the student, you're a perpetual student, and the earth and mother nature and all of the spirits of the land are
Mm.
they're your tutors, so it's
Yeah.
those are the years where for me, I learned the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you have your astrological garden laid out. Is it like in a circle? Is it in different beds? Like, do you have the solar herbs in one bed, like the Mars herbs in another bed?
Yeah, it's so essentially you have to defer to a certain like, so the astrological correspondences and all that stuff, that is there and it's present, but it's more so when you plant, it's more so when you harvest.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's more, but also because the thing is, I don't know if you can see, but we're kind of shady here. We've got a lot of old growth trees, and so what has to take precedence is how much sun does this thing need? Okay, that's going in the front yard because that's where
Yeah.
we have the most amount of sun. Obviously, I would say the solar ones and the I'm trying to grow tobacco, right?
Nice.
Because that's my daily incense of Mars. Those we've got in the front yard where there's more sun, and then we've got certain. I would say the Venusian plants and the mercurial plants. They spread out. Verbena, lavender. We've got those kind of like spread out in different spots, and then obviously we have the Saturnian stuff, which horsetail, and then vegetable stuff, the root stuff. That's more underground right now, I would say. The stuff that the root stuff that we're growing. So we've got some insulation, some cardboard, and some leaves and stuff like that to kind of keep the warmth and the moisture in, because it did get quite cold quite quickly here. So we've not necessarily got it laid out. I mean, ideally we would, but we really have to work with the land.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the ways in which I did this was I used the tarot. Yeah. So aside from those considerations, I use a 6-card spread that I learned from Josephine McCarthy's work, and she basically you lay out the tarot directionally, and you can use this for inside or outside, but you get the lay of the land based off of elementally what is happening and where you have to do elemental remediation, etc., things like that. So getting that kind of lay of the land was really helpful. I mean, and like spot on. We've got a fire pit over in the east, and then boom, we've got Ace of Wands. that kind of stuff in the different directions. So that was really helpful to kind of figure out. Okay, we've got certain water issues over there, so we're going to take the more active plants and we're going to put them in an area, obviously that has sun, but that are associated with the more active planetary correspondences. We're going to put them over here where they get the most amount of sun, but also corresponding to whatever's going on there elementally to sort of bolster them. So that's the thing with the astrological gardening, right? Is that you can't separate astrology from the elements. It's, as a matter of fact, Agrippa says the elements are the source of all things. So they're the root, they're the foundation of all things. So I did the best that I could, given the natural layout of my land with sun and water.
Very
So
cool.
so when you're doing your astrological gardening, what are the main factors that you're using? Are you using like phase and sign? I mean, we talked about this a little bit when I was on your show, but listeners now, like, what do you use? Like, is it phase and moon sign? Is it planetary day, planetary hour? They're using aspects or like when planets are rising or culminating.
I would say I have to take all of those things into consideration, but it's going to depend on what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
I would harvest in the day and hour, and if I can get, it's finicky. If I can get, a planet in domicile or well aspected, or let's say, coming over the horizon, a rising planet in that day and hour, then I'll wait. But you know that you can't. You've got to time it right, because if you wait too long, things like arugula, they start getting the stems get too woody. They start blooming. That you can kind of fix. You just nip them. But at a certain point, it's too mature for my purposes. So I'll try and do that. But the main important thing is phase of moon, because my astrological gardening takes into account, given my Chinese medicine background, takes what they would call chi, what I call etheric energy.
Yeah.
It has to take that into account, and we know that the phase of moon really, I don't know if it controls it or governs it. Let's say like it would the watery tides. There's definitely that effect, right? With light and the water or moisture in a plant that comes into play. But there's a relationship to the full moon and the availability of or the bolstering of that etheric energy, that chi in the plant,
Yeah.
and in people too. So if I want a plant to grow up, then I'm going to be planting probably just before the full moon, maybe like waxing gibbous period or something like that. And then if I want it to grow down, I'm going to be planting in the dark of the moon, right? So that the roots reach down. But I am going to try, if I'm doing it astrologically, I'm going to try and get phase and sign.
Yeah.
I'm going to try my best. I've found that gardening in general can be, and this is just my own thing, when Venus is well aspected and visible, like over the horizon, it's just a good time to do anything. And I think that's because she has something to do with cultivation, or at least, if not cultivation, actually the processes of germination and growth on the earth, for lack of a better term. She's supportive of those things.
Yeah. Very generative, kind of like that generative energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
exactly. And it's then there's other things where I'm, I do a lot of, aside from the alchemy, which has its own sort of phases that I'm still working out. I work mainly off of Phoenix's calendar. He's got that really laid out very nicely. But things like we make soap here and stuff like that. So when I get a good election, I'll use a planetary herb, and I'll make and sort of, I won't fully consecrate, but I'll make a bar of soap. Like if I have a good Venus election or something like that, I will, in as close as I can get to the aspect. Like I'll start as it's almost exact. I'll make the stuff like that. So I'll kind of utilize the same thing for teas and stuff like that. Or if I can't get a good aspect, I'll do the day and hour, the planetary hour. But on the Arcanum channel, I did a whole video on how to make Venusian soap. I utilized a pretty good Venus election.
So when you do that, do you do you said you don't do a consecration. Do you do an
No.
invocation?
I do. I do an invocation. I do a little bit of vision work, but I approach the work with a level of presence
Yeah.
that I wouldn't normally. It's crazy here. We've got like half a homestead, so I'm not always hyper focused on what I'm doing unless it's dangerous. And making soap is slightly dangerous.
Yeah.
Slightly, yeah.
But
You can burn yourself there. Yeah.
oh yeah, you can breathe in the fumes, the noxious
Yeah.
fumes. I've done that a couple of times. It's like it's not even painful. Your lungs just stop. But for something like this in that space where I'm attempting to draw the powers of whatever the planet is, right, becoming the hierophant or high priest of the planet, and facing the direction where it is, whether it's above or below the horizon, facing that direction, finding it, and actually for a period facing it. And then once I do the actual performance, I'll do my invocations facing it. And then when I do the performance of actually making and mixing the soap and adding the herbs at a certain period, what they call trace in the soap, the level of how it's cured, I will actually turn my back to the planet, and I invoke the energies through me, so that I am consecrated, so to speak, or charged while I'm doing the act. But I won't intentionally project any of that stuff into the plant, because I'm not like a big fan of giving other people talismanic materials. There will always be, in at least in the way that my theory of that I've been taught and the way that I practice, which is a combination of Western ceremonial and Eastern, right? Because there's an Eastern sigil tradition where they use chi. It's always chi, and those documents go back, hundreds of years further than our our sort of astrological magical record does. I mean, these are texts that they were talking, that are perfectly preserved from 200-300 BCE. The Taoist, they call them Fu, right? The sigil tradition. So the way that I learned, or the way that I theorize it and the way that I practice it is that when you're consecrating something, you're drawing the energy in, and your microcosm, your sphere of sensation becomes dominantly that energy. That planetary power is now dominant, and then you project it into the materia. Now, what I don't like about that is that it's gonna always have a little bit of my etheric energy. It's always gonna have a little bit of my chi, and I don't. So that would be for me that I would.
Yeah, you don't give it
That's
away.
right. That's why I don't consecrate. But that would be normally how I do something like that. Acting as a high priest of the planet, but crafting this material and being very, very present. And I've had conversations with alchemists about how when they do their alchemy, they'll use a specific type of breathing that will enhance their focus and really hone them in. And so, having learned those techniques, I apply that to what I'm doing as well.
Awesome.
It also seems like with a lot of these things, ritual magic, alchemy even, there's a side of it where the product isn't even the goal. It's like not making the talisman or making the alchemical solution, the elixir or whatever you're making. It's the act of being the mediator between heaven and earth, and then that changing you. It's like paying attention during the process, and like that, like it's like the consciousness of the alchemist is what is what changes the material as well as what is changed.
I think you're 100% right on that, and they teach you that in good Chinese medicine schools. They teach you that the doctor, the physician, is an adept. Now that doesn't mean the one that's just out of school. They're talking about the elders, but they become adepts, and they basically say that the healing begins not at the doctor's prescription, but as he's literally entering the room to see the patient. And I think that has a lot there's a strong correlation. The more I learn about both systems, the more I see them as two expressions of the same exact thing. The Western alchemical and magical traditions, and the Eastern herbal and medical traditions.
Yeah. There's also this other thing I was thinking about it as you're talking about this, and there's that separation between personal chi, prana, etheric energy, which is more of the Victorian Golden Dawn way of seeing talismans and magic. Is more of the will of the magician, and then like the more of the Picatrix style, which is more like it's not that the magician is putting their chi into the talisman. It's that they're a spirit of a planet, much more powerful than any human is coming into that talisman. And there's like a very different scale almost of power. But also I wonder, like, is there still chi in that talisman from your perspective?
Well, that's the most interesting thing, because you reach the point where you kind of get there and you're like, well, what is it? Is it a spirit? Is it? And I've said this before, actually, probably recently, because I had recently had a talk on elemental magic and spirit. What is a spirit? I mean, I think it's a very crude thing to say that it's, to think of it as like, this Casper the Ghost. So some people don't want to theorize what it is, and they want to remain in the mystery. But my experience in working with these things, because you have to if you're going to be in a magical order, is that it's a disembodied form of consciousness. It's a disembodied intelligence, for lack of a better word. They don't have any actual form, right? David Rankine talks about this, and very, very eloquently. He talks about how we're just using astral, what he calls gateway images. There are agreed upon forms that are amenable to cross communication. So how am I supposed to, some people don't see them in the shoe stone, the obsidian mirror of evocation and things like that. They hear them. They're clairaudient, or they feel them, or they encounter them as, I like to call it, as a textured field. But at the end of the day, there's a form of communication that happens. We see that in plants too. We tend to think that they're, that they're not conscious. They have a consciousness. And so we need, in magic, forces you to broaden your idea of what consciousness is and what it means. And essentially, when you're operating with a particular spiritual intelligence, angelic intelligence, planetary intelligence, you are tuning into what I conceptualize as a broadband spectrum of consciousness. That is, as Agrippa would say, sort of a link, so you tune into a particular channel, right, on like a transistor radio or something like that. In the same way, and Agrippa makes a very sort of early or proto-scientific analogy. He says, you have to tune yourself the way a tuning fork is tuned to this planet. And so it's a similar way, right? He's talking about vibration. He's talking about movement. I see it similarly as like a musical scale, right? If you're playing in the key of C major, my root note, let's say maybe either the lowest octave or middle C, that's my materia. And then I'm going to play the scale upwards. So I'm tuning into this band spectrum of frequency of really intelligent energy. And what comes through when I talk, when you have conversations or you get information or you have an encounter, an evocation I use an obsidian mirror. That's an image that this thing is agreeing to present itself as.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's a disembodied. And how is it? We all know it doesn't show up the way you see like a movie on a screen. You have to attune your inner eye, your perceptive ability. You have to cultivate the receptive state. Mm-hmm. So it's consciousness speaking to consciousness, and human beings are of such a dense, materialistic sort of disposition that we need a form most of the time. And not only that, but I've had, sometimes I've encountered an entity or something like that, and I've scratched my head and I'm like, why do you look like this right now? And the answer is I didn't want to scare you. So it's like this wasn't what I was. This isn't the picture of you in the book, but I didn't want to frighten you. Things like that. But I would say that you are always using consciousness, right? And you are always all of magic we are at the forefront of the exploration of consciousness, what it is, what it does, how unity interacts with itself through the guises of multiplicity. And so I think it's personally, I think it's simplistic to think that it's just like a person, like, hey, come over and fix my plumbing, and some guy shows up. There is a collaboration, a cooperation in this project, whatever it is. And if you're working with the right spirits, it can be divinizing. It can be purifying.
Yeah.
And so, those are my thoughts on it. I find spirits to just be the images of intelligent energy that I am working with, and they do work through me and with me, and that sort of thing. My consciousness is engaged, and therefore my etheric body is engaged, right? Because they have a saying in Qigong, where the mind goes, the Qi flows. There's nothing your mind can do. There's nothing that can happen to your mind that will not immediately and directly affect your etheric body.
Mm-hmm. I think that's all really well said. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. It's a good question.
Yeah.
And it also, so you said the spirit is the image of that conscious entity in a way. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Well, the image of the spirit is the image. Right. I don't think it has one definite body the way that during my incarnation I have a definite body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it begs the question, like, how important is the image? Because in one way it seems like the image is crucially important for contacting, but in another way it's just an image. It's a representation that the mind can latch onto.
Yeah. I would say that one of the things that we find the most in certain forms of evocation historically is that there's great potential for deception, delusion, things like this. So look at the Chaldean oracles, right? The Chaldean oracles, That's the Bible for theurgy. They say they refer to some of these entities as the dog-faced demons who never reveal true form to mortal gaze. You will not see. So I've always prefaced this. I gave a presentation at the Esotericism and Freemasonry conference last month. I did a scrying workshop, was one of them. And, I err on the side of caution. People were like, I had a whole slide that was basically like, why should you scry? And then the slide just said, don't. And the joke was, it was received, but there's some truth to it where it's like, we are at a severe disadvantage anytime we work with these entities.
Yeah.
Particularly if we are very green, very new to this.
Yeah.
We haven't developed a good bullshit detector. We don't know how to feel or see energy. We don't know how to really develop and when to trust the intuition, what the intuition is. This is all the self-work that goes into developing yourself before you go and, open the grimoire and start summoning people. So entities. So one of the things, they have no obligation. There are no obligation. I mean, I've seen records of, like, you look at John Dee and his Enochian thing. I was just looking at them, the actual folio, the actual pages of the angelic session in the British Library last month. And he stops like every, I don't know, what appears to be 3 paragraphs to re-invoke God, to re-invoke Christ.
Oh,
Very, very Christian. And he's testing all these things by the cross and by the name of Christ Jesus and all this stuff, because his thought was that they wouldn't be able to remain in communication if they were infernal spirits.
Right.
But we see time and time again, multiple times in this, I think it was like a 7-year communication, that false entities did come in, right? I mean, Edward Kelly would be talking to the angel Raphael. I think this is one of my favorite visuals of the whole thing, and a portal would open up, and another angel Raphael would come out of it and start flogging, like whipping and kicking the one he was talking. And he was like, "This is an imposter. This is an infernal demon." It happened multiple times.
Wow.
So it's like, what can you really do to make sure that this thing is what you think it is? Now, the Golden Dawn teaches certain techniques that have been very, very successful for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have to do first with self-delusion. Am I deluding myself? Is this bullshit? Is it active imagination, which is different from that reception of an astral image?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it also, for me, that brings up the question of discernment in terms of, discernment in general is incredibly important. But, like, what kind of entities do you want to be invoking in the first place? And I think that, like, because as we were talking about a little bit earlier, it's like whatever energy you are invoking, whatever consciousness you are trying to communicate with, affects you, on a very powerful level. And it seems as though some people, I don't know, maybe I'm a prude, or I'm not.
No, I think you're in good company with me. I think I know what you're going to say. So go ahead.
Well, I just like some people. People we've had on the show are love to summon entities that I have no interest in summoning whatsoever. But and it's very popular these days. It's very popular these days. In fact, there are a lot of people who think that is magic.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's one of the main reasons I felt compelled to leave my wonderful private magical practice and to assume this duty, at least that's the way I felt, to talk about exactly what you're talking about right now. Because if you think that there is no danger in magic, then you don't really believe in these things.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so also in terms of, like, making sure you're contacting the right people too. I think that's partially where, like, the things that I do try to contact spirits will be angels, deities, devatas, and those are on one side doing, like, intense, like, sadhana with a particular deity, with a particular form under the tutelage of a particular person who has communication with that entity, and it's done all that sadhana. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot more safety involved there. And the other is with astrological magic, when you're timing exactly the time of communication, and it's a very benefic time, there's a lot less room for error, in my opinion, because in a way that those astrological spirits are spirits of time. So by timing the time, making sure you have the right time, you're getting the right consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's, you can get really involved there with the decans and stuff like that. But I agree with you entirely. I think that is one of the benefits, like you're saying, of, and this is again another unpopular sentiment. One of the benefits of working within an order that you trust, that you use your discernment, not just, hey, this order has a Facebook group, let's see what's going, you've got to really, and again, there's that whole aspect, that part that truly synchronicity does play in our lives, right? I mean, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and so, or the teaching opportunity appears, and the opportunity for the person to be taught. But there's a saying, it's probably not news to any of your listeners, that the Golden Dawn is an outer court for an inner Rosicrucian order. So the Rosicrucian inner order basically avers that there is a great chain of initiation that comes from the heavens and goes through the earth, and it's a poetic way of saying that humans are not they're not even the most important initiates within the order. They're and those become your teachers, and in a way, and those are the guides you work with. And one of the ways that we do that in Western magic is using the codified systems of hierarchies by people like Agrippa, people like Pseudo Dionysus, using the hierarchies. In the Golden Dawn, we say all the time, one of the main axioms is invoke the highest first. Why? Yeah. Because otherwise you set your operation, your intention, whether it's what you mean or not, because there's a technology to this, you set that in alignment with the will of a subordinate entity. So you would invoke the highest first, and then again, work your way down that ontological chain, which is what was I saying before, that spectrum of consciousness that goes, through a planet, and then ultimately is rooted in a plant or a material or a mineral or something like that. So we have these systems that, Pseudo Dionysus was, this stuff was being written in the first few centuries of the Common Era. So, and it's been used in magic for a really long time. So there are these protocols, there are these egregores and systems of teaching and transmission that play heavily into the proper education, I think, of a magician, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important, and often under it's just not popular right now. I think the fads go, come and go. And right now there's certain fads that are stronger, but it's like the real transmission continues regardless of fads.
Right. It's got to go. It's a good thing. It can be a very good thing, because what it is it's like a magnet. It forces. There's a pressure. There's an exterior pressure on people that are doing the work, and orders that are doing the work, and they're forced to sort of trim down, pare down, and some of them are bulking up, but I think that ultimately an egregore that is out of harmony with a certain type of intention or spiritual work, fundamentally it will actually get smaller. The groups will get smaller and go underground and stuff like that. You even see that in religions right now. There are certain religious groups that are, let's say, you've got this independent sacramental movement. You've got things like Gnostic churches, of which I am a part, and they get really, really small, and they do the work very, very sincerely through the passage of time. The same thing's happening in Freemasonry. Freemasonic numbers are dwindling, but the thing is, we're going back to esotericism. It's
Yeah.
not just fork and knife masonry anymore. And there are very, very tangible benefits to that kind of thing. Charity, all the work that the brothers are doing in Asheville right now for everybody, very, very tangible benefits to being very mundane. But for a long time, esotericism was anathema in the Freemasonic institution, and now things are getting smaller and they're getting more esoteric.
Yeah. And I guess this brings us to the book that you've written and
Yeah.
published this year, Formless Fire. And this is basically a synopsis of the Western magical tradition. And I think it looks pretty amazing in terms of how you've laid it out, like what are the main currents and how that, like it gives you context, especially for anybody who's still getting, because the whole thing is really overwhelming. It can be overwhelming to somebody just getting involved, and they think that the strain or the current that it got initiated into, whatever that means for them, what they started with is the whole of magic. But there's a really a broad river, and that's only one river in the wider ocean of magic. But so tell us a little bit about Formless Fire. What prompted you to write this? What is the thrust of it for you? Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I'm curious though. I forgive my ignorance, but I'm just curious. AC, are you a practitioner of magic?
I guess not in the same sense as you and Isaac, but as an herbalist and being connected with nature, I do a lot of work with nature spirits. And so, yeah, I dabble. Yeah.
Yeah, I find those spirits to be pretty stable and trustworthy, to be honest with you. You always know when you're working with them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You need to be in that grounded frame of mind,
Totally.
I like to call it Hobbit mode.
Yeah, I like that.
I like to be in Hobbit mode. I'm naturally Tory. Yeah, I was just curious. That was the podcast host in me jumping
Yeah.
out for a second.
Right.
Yes, use some questions. Yeah, a Formless Fire was, again, it was an effort to contextualize systems of magic that were becoming increasingly popular and redirect the focus to what I consider to be the more important one in terms of the story of humanity, which is for me, and I'm not talking about like, oh, this is my truth, because there are vast canons that would agree with what I hypothesized or what was my thesis in that book. And it's not because I'm some special person. It's just because I did the reading and I didn't allow myself to tune out what was being said to gratify what I wanted to be. So I very, very methodically, because like you said, a lot of people, they think that magic is the system that they were initiated into. And yes, it was quite a surprise for me when I found out that wasn't the truth. But from then on, I dedicated myself to like, what is the telos, right? Or that's a philosophical word for what is the purpose. I can't really understand what this is or how it works until I figure out why it exists. So as close as anyone can get to that, right? Because greater minds than I have already discussed this at length, and it's available. It's there. But not a lot of people are talking about it because it doesn't sell. So one of the things that I wanted to do, right, it's in the Apologia in the beginning, was posit this theurgic line of transmission, which is I would say the ascent trajectory. Again, that's putting it analogically. I don't believe in any true verticality, but I would say we understand what I'm talking about when I say the ascent trajectory of magic. And I try to show as best as I can how that moved and how that developed through the centuries, beginning in Egyptian Greece, obviously, or Greek Egypt, I should say, after the Alexandrian conquests, particularly of Persia, because when Alexander conquers Persia, he gets Egypt. He was a twofer. And so then, you've got the whole Alexandrian era. That's when we see the beginning, the prototype of our modern arts, Western astrology, as we understand it, being composed of the planets, signs, aspects, and houses, that's the first time on the historical record we see it. In that place at that time. Modern alchemy.
Yeah.
In that place at that time. Modern ceremonial magic. In that place at that time. So it's in the West. So I wanted to start there and move forward, and then people can. I break with chronology because how do you order, divination, astrology, alchemy? It didn't happen in such a neat linear trajectory. So at some point I have to break with it and just start talking about the various subjects: alchemy, astrology, divination, ceremonial magic, all that. The difference between ceremonial and the mysteries, right? Stephen Skinner makes a very good argument that magic itself as a technology, as a techne, as he calls it, or various, types of technology or techniques, there's nothing spiritual necessarily about it, right? Because we're talking about what you were saying, that kind of goetic evocation. I have to talk about that. And I do. And I talk about the grimoire tradition and clarify some stuff like that. But, I think one of the mistakes that the late, though, he did great things, the late Jake Stratton Kent, he said theurgy and goetia were the same thing. Basically he says that in a couple of his books. Yeah. And the issue that I have with that is if you put a theurgist and a goetic magician in the same room, they would appear to be doing the same thing because they're using the same technology, but the intention and the trajectory is different. So to go back to the analogy, the theurgist ascends, the goetic magician descends. And that's purely analogical. I'm just using an analogy. I don't think that that's truly the case. Some people would point to the fact that theurgists entered the earth. They went down in order to go up. And I agree with that, but I also know that that is starting where you are, right? The geo-referential perspective, but then ultimately working your way out, so to speak. So I try and show these things and talk about these things, and then how they kind of arrive to us in the modern day by things like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, because that really was the nexus point in the West for how all this stuff is here today. It wouldn't exist the way it does. We wouldn't, everybody learns the ritual of the pentagram first. It's the Golden Dawn invention. The whole theory behind what we're doing with magic comes from the Golden Dawn by way of offshoot orders founded by, Dion Fortune, Crowley. All of these people were in the Golden Dawn, or really they're offshoot orders, but it was still, I call them the second generation. So yeah, I try to do that, and then I end with an afterword that just talks about living traditions in post-modernity. In other words, where do we go here? How do we've got this technology by and large has been resurrected to us. What do we do with it? How do we become practitioners and custodians of it responsibly?
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess maybe one thing is that context of a Western magical tradition too, and because I know that's controversial sometimes these days too, just the name. But it's also hard to talk about it. Like how do you talk about what it is? But at the same time, people like you, people like me, we're not just doing Western magic. We're not just doing Golden Dawn, or I'm also doing Vedic astrology and these other things. You're doing Taoism, and there's always this mix happening.
Yeah, well, like you said, in order to be able to talk about these things and not come across as like somebody who has a fragmented consciousness, right? Because at a certain point, a certain level of hyper rationality and hyperbole, really, too many words.
Yeah.
When you start chopping things into ever smaller pieces, start losing the context.
Yeah.
I might be able to really, really dial in on the nuance here, but I can't see the forest for the trees. That's not what we want to do. I mean, like, how am I supposed to tell you what an apple is if I'm technically considered discriminating against fruit by using the word apple? So I can't just say round thing that is red that tastes this way grows on tree. Too much. It's too much. So I acknowledge in the beginning of the book, my first forays were Zazen and Taoism. It's really my first forays into esotericism. But I need to use the conventions of speech. They are a necessary evil in being able to talk about this stuff because, we, for a really long time, again, we exoticized our spirituality
Yeah.
and we outsourced it. And
Yeah.
I think that at a certain level, the reclamation of this stuff into our cultural history and the usage of it becomes important for us because I think that a lot of us, and maybe that's changing, but I grew up in a culture that is, I can understand the nuances and the subtleties of something like the Greco-Egyptian tradition better than I can the Vedic. It's just not,
Yeah.
So for people like that, we kind of have to use this terminology. Now, some people might say that that's, that some people might criticize me for that. And I mean, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Like, well, you can't do anything without getting criticized. So.
No, absolutely not.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Very true. I guess the question is like, so what is the difference between West and East? Where do you draw the line? Because it really does seem like Egypt is Hellenistic Egypt is the epicenter. But then again, also like, this is a different question, but how far do you think it goes back as well? Because that's just the first time it's entered into the historical record. But it seems as though a lot of these practices were secret or orally transmitted, or it was maybe in the historical record, but got lost in the Library of Alexandria.
Got burnt. Yeah. I would say, well, first, the techniques are virtually, particularly my field of, or I would say my sector of expertise in the Eastern tradition is esoteric Taoism. Now, if you want to learn esoteric Taoism from somebody on the internet, do not come to me. Benabel Wen, she is one of the most brilliant, practitioner academics talking about Tao. She's one of the most important voices in this scene right now talking about that stuff.
Mhm.
But for all intents and purposes, my experience and my understanding is in esoteric Taoism. I don't connect with it as much as I do Western ceremonial, but at the same time, I wouldn't be doing Western ceremonial if I didn't first have a Taoist practice. Like if somebody told me you had to give up Qigong, your meditation, your internal alchemy, if you want to practice magic, then I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. So these things have to work together. And I think that in terms of fundamental techniques, they in many instances are indistinguishable. For instance, we call forth the angels of the quarters. They're not necessarily elemental angels. They're just the angels associated with the quarters of the earth, the four directions. Those four directions have elemental attributions because they have winds, like Zephyrus, Boreas, the northern cold, dry wind, that's the quarter of the north. But ultimately it's this quaternary system of the direction. That's a truism or at least a mainstay of Western ceremonial. Well, if you look back at the Taoist canons, first, second century BCE, they're invoking the gods and spirits of the quarters the same way. So in terms of technique, a lot of it is fundamentally indistinguishable.
Yeah.
What I would say is that the Eastern tradition has, particularly in China, has a much better record because if they hated the regime, they didn't burn all their books. They no, we got to hold on to these. This is important. We want this, right? And set this down carefully. We didn't do that in the West. They burned everything.
Yeah.
We lost
Fanatics.
everything. So there's a way, really,
Yeah.
and actually, I wrote a book that's coming out. Lou Ellen's putting it out in April of 2025. It's called Etheric Magic, and essentially, I took the Western system of alchemy, that verbiage, and those terms, and the Kabbalistic tree of life, right, that many practical magicians will be familiar with, and I use that as a framework to take what I know of the Eastern energy system and synthesize them so that they become applicable to Western magic, elemental, celestial, and alchemical magic. So I think they are two sides of a single coin.
Yeah.
Now, where I draw a line of differentiation is, as you're saying, that, believe it or not, that point of the middle, right? Mesopotamia,
Yeah.
right there, just in the in between East and West. And I am not, a lot of that erudition, a lot of the uncovering of what's going on or what went on there, the historical record is happening now. So in 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have a wealth of information that may very well renovate everything we think we know. But it's just not a lot of it is available right now, especially to somebody like me. I don't have academic credentials, but I've got friends in the right places. but so I would say that for me, it's textual. It's textual. These were written at this time in this place, and those over there are written in this time and at that place. I can read and understand Greek mostly. I'm not like a native scholar, but I'm Greek and I grew up hearing the language, speaking the language. So that's available to me. I tried in college. I tried to learn Pinyin. I can't do it. It's just my brain doesn't, it's just in one ear out the other. So that's another advantage for me working in the Western system in terms of my output. But so I would also say that a fundamental difference occurs when we get to something like Neoplatonism, which actually the Platonic tradition predates any of the Hermetic stuff. There is no Hermetic text that is older than the Platonic dialogues. They're contemporaneous with the Neoplatonic school, and they share the exact same cosmology and terminology. So when you start seeing that stuff, you start saying, particularly like a philosopher like Plotinus, right, the quote unquote father of Neoplatonism, very Oriental, very Oriental. As a matter of fact, he learned from somebody named Ammonius Saccas, which we now are thinking and I put this in the book, we're thinking it's less of a proper name and more of a term. Saka being the
Scythian.
Greek word for Scythian. Yeah. And Ammonius, Ammonas being sage or teacher. So he learned from the Scythian sage. And when he had completed his tutelage, he actually scheduled a trip to go to the East to learn. And he was supposed to go with this military detail, but the commanding officer ended up dying in like an accident, and so his trip got canceled. But Plotinus wanted to go study in India. He wanted to learn that stuff. And when you read his philosophy, that thank God Porphyry preserved for us, his student, it's so Eastern. There are so many things that points of confluence and even similar ideas to things like Taoism and Buddhism in particular. But the one thing I will say is that Taoism and maybe Kabbalah are very similar.
Yeah.
In that they study the material rather than the metaphysical. And I'm not talking about the Kabbalah we use, Q Kabbalah or Hermetic Kabbalah. I'm talking about, there are many schools of Kabbalah, but the more orthodox schools of Kabbalah are more concerned with, what's going on down here, because there's nothing you can really say about the Ein Sof. There's nothing you can say about the light. It's just light. And in a similar way, the Taoist cosmology is that this is a web that has been spun, right? The universe, everything's connected, and if you pull this end moves. But they call it, it's referred to almost as a web that has no weaver. So they're not necessarily concerned with a soteriological or like, I guess, a divine component. And there's a difference there when you get to things like Platonism and Gnosticism of the Western esoteric tradition, Hermetism. They're trying to go back up.
Yeah.
They're trying to become closer to the thing that other systems don't pay that much attention to. I would say that is a major difference between East and West.
But then again, you see that a lot in India too. So there's all these, it's like different traditions. But I mean, Plotinus is basically the father of, the father of Neoplatonism, but in a way also that's the grounding of Western esotericism.
Yeah, I mean, and then, they call him the first father, and then the second father is Iamblichus, because he introduces theurgy. He's much more of, I like Iamblichus's view. because he's much more like, no, we live in nature, so we have to use nature if we want to ascend, right? Working from the georeferential perspective, from where we are and working our way upward, so to speak. Again, it's an analogy. So then it becomes a little bit more in the theurgic school, which got extremely popular to the point where I think it was Proclus or Damascus, one of the later scholars of the school, that had to like okay, that's enough theurgy for today. Let's go back to the philosophy. Let's go back to this kind, and reincorporate the older, at that time, more traditional methods, because it got very, very popular doing all the ritual and having all that kind of stuff. But there are sort of two tracks. Again, I think it's a little oversimplified. It's a little reductive, but it's an important thing because we still struggle with these today. We still ask these questions today. How do we do it? What's important? Is you know how do we ground ourselves while how do we move deeper into our connection with the earth while simultaneously becoming more oriented towards the spiritual? It's still relevant questions.
I think so too. Definitely. And it's always this like kind of a back and forth. It's like you emphasize this side and then the other side gets de-emphasized. So then you have to re-emphasize this, and then this other thing gets de-emphasized. So you have to re-emphasize,
Well, the Taoists would say, don't emphasize.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then each individual person on their journey needs different things at different times. So it's a continual journey, and it's a continual like. I was listening to Alan Chapman on Jason Louve's podcast recently, and he was likening magicians and to gardeners. We're each gardening this tradition, like these aspects, these things, and it's not so much like any one tradition holds the truth. It's that they're all part of the garden, and it's the magician, the
right, and there's something about the idea, right? I've had this conversation as well with alchemists and stuff. Is that the weeds that grow in your yard that are in a tremendous amount of abundance? Those are the plants that are telling you, hey, you need us.
Yeah.
You need your physiology, your spirituality. It requires us. So we're growing in abundance around. Meantime, you're mowing them down and stuff like that. But it's like, no, these are allies, and I think it's the same thing with the things which are available to us spiritually as well. You can't if you can't find an order, there'll be something else. If you can't find a reputable teacher that you actually sit and commune with, there'll be something else. You will get what you need. I truly believe that. I think you're right.
Yeah. So, do you have any words of advice for any young esotericists who want to be, like who are interested in this path and want to follow it?
Yeah, get a job. I mean that. I'm like being facetious, but I'm also, have your shit in order before you decide to do this, because this will generally disrupt your life for the rest of your life. So make sure that you handle earth first. Get the earth element first. Don't worry about all the talking heads. It's not a race. It's not a race. You don't need to become some internet personality. That's probably the wrong reason to start doing this stuff. If there is one, that's probably not when you find yourself reaching a place of rigidity, find a way to melt again. Find a way to open up, become porous again, become malleable again. And I mean, I think you and I have we definitely see some of the damage that can happen, and we definitely see this trend towards things that are a little risky, things that are a little dark. Our society is obsessed. We're enamored of a dark aesthetic, and what do we have all around us? Darkness, right? It's the magical mirror of the universe. It's a feedback loop. So we have to find a way to stop that if we can, but it only happens individually. But all that aside, the acknowledgement of that, and that there are groups of people that happen to be sort of maybe perpetuating that. Don't turn it into a team sport where you're competing with orders, you're trying to silence other voices. I don't agree with 60% of what 90% of my guests say.
Yeah.
but I'm gonna have them on anyway because
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah.
The same.
we need community.
Yeah, we
We
do.
need to, we need to be able to sit and talk with each other. I don't care if I disagree with you. I don't
Mhm.
hate you.
Mhm.
I want to hear what you have to say. And one of the best ways to melt yourself down, become more malleable after being rigid, is to do exactly that. Go and sit and talk with somebody who you don't agree with,
Mhm.
because that's the last thing we need is to introduce this very caustic, chaotic element of bifurcation,
Yeah.
separation in something as powerful as magic, you know? So you don't want that to happen. That's really it.
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of advice. It's all very good. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, normally I don't have too much to say about that, but I don't know. You guys have got me going. I'm
Yeah.
drinking coffee.
It's good.
well, yeah. So I think we've had a very good episode. I really liked talking with you and exploring these concepts. I think there's a lot of high level thinking going on.
Mm-hmm.
Glad to be able to witness it, and be part of it too, and to be part of a community like this, because that I think that what you're saying about community is very important. It doesn't matter if you disagree with people. You're in being in a relationship with them doesn't mean you have to agree with them.
Yeah.
And we don't agree with
Yeah.
a lot of what people say on our podcast too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if people know that. Like they
Yeah.
should. Like just because we have somebody on doesn't mean we endorse everything they say.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, I'd love to have the both of you on the podcast. You can come on together, or you can come on jointly or severally. It's up to you. But I love talking about. Somehow we always start talking about magic and astrology, but I love to talk about the plant path. So I'd love to get deeper into that with you guys on my own show, and if that's something that you want to do in the future.
Definitely.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, and by the way, it's like I find a lot myself agreeing with you a lot, which is nice too, because I feel like we're coming from different backgrounds, different perspectives, but there's still a similar thrust there.
Both Ikes.
Ike's, yeah, I was also.
Yeah, that's true.
That's my nickname in high school was Ike. But yeah, so where can people find your podcast, find your book? What are you excited about? You have the Hermopolis Symposium coming up.
Yeah, tell us about that.
What's going on? Yeah.
Sure. The Hermopolis Symposium is actually happening this month. So I'm going to be taking off in just a few days. It's August 23rd or 24th to the 27th. And essentially it was October. Yeah, what did I say?
August.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, wishful thinking. Summer.
Yeah.
October, yes, October 24th to the 27th. We're going to be, well, essentially myself and Dr. Mervat Abdel Nasser, who is an author and just a wonderful person, a tremendous spirit. She bought a bunch of land in the desert in Egypt, outside of Minya, Egypt, about 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and she created something called the New Hermopolis Village. And essentially, it is a Egyptian, but also world, of relevance to world history. But it's an Egyptian historical sort of preservation site. She uses, in order to construct the place, they used historic, types of architecture, materials. She grows native plants there, like the Egyptian blue lotus and the native olive and things like that. And so she's been doing this work for 15 years and decided that she wanted to have a conference. And somehow I got tapped on the shoulder to help organize it and to go speak at it. But essentially, what we're doing is we are gathering some of the top scholars in the world on esotericism. It's an international conference. We've got Walter Hanegraaff coming,
Wow.
Shannon Grimes, Gregory Shaw has produced a presentation. Dr. Charles Stang from the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions will be with us. We've got high-level academics, Dr. Aaron Cheek, who he's, the CEO of Rubido Press, putting out great work. And he's actually at the intersection of academia and practice. But then on the other hand, we have practitioners that are also coming. Jamie Paul Lamb, Soledad Davies, P.D. Newman, many others. And we're all getting together and having a 4-day symposium completely sequestered at the New Hermopolis Village there will be digital passes to see, because there's no on-site attendance. The last day, we are going to take a group field trip to the ruins of Hermopolis Magna, the ancient city of the scholars in Egypt. And this event is the first of its kind. It's absolutely incredible what we've been able to do, and I'm very much looking forward to it. We have some attendees that couldn't be there in person. Ronnie Pontiac, Peter Mark Adams, Marlena Seven Bremner. They couldn't travel, so what they did was they prepared digital presentations.
Uh-huh.
So on that weekend, we're having 3 days of digital presentations, and then the following month, we're releasing the proceedings of the conference. So for $90, you can get 5 or 6 days worth of presentations of, like, the cream of the cream for me. So I'll get you guys the link for that, because we are selling digital passes.
Cool.
You'll be able to stream it, and then you'll also be able to rewatch at your leisure. So again, all of these presenters, all just this unique, beautiful event, and you guys can basically have it for $90. Very, very, very high value. I've been to lots of conferences this year, and they're at least 3 or 4 times the amount of that. But so yeah, that's going to be this month. For anybody else that wants to check out the book, or wants to check out the podcast or the documentary style presentations I do on the Western esoteric traditions, read my blog, you can go to ikebaker.com.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah, what an honor to be able to be part of that
Yeah.
symposium.
Yeah, it's wild. I jokingly tell my friends and temple mates, I'm kind of like Forrest Gump. I'm just happy to be there.
Yeah.
I just, somebody will come along and be like, "Hey, you want to do this thing?" And sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's gonna be great. You guys just had a conference too, didn't you? Plant Cunning
Yeah.
Conference.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
did the
We-
second one, and it was an awesome event, great success here at the farm. And I felt the same way of just being in awe of all these amazing speakers and attendees. Like, the people that came out of the woodwork to attend are now friends, So I love those chances for the in-person of gatherings. I think they're important, but it's also really cool that you're able to share the information with your global audience, as well as offering the digital thing. That's something we haven't done yet, but we would like to in the future, since we also have, a wider audience online.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Ike. It was a pleasure meeting you, and I look forward to the next time we can chat.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me on. I really love this stuff you guys are doing.
Thanks.
Thank you. Likewise.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Cheers.
You.